Hi folks, FloridaMan here, and now it is inevitable. We have come to the end game. We're discussing how you finish strong playing as Russia. In order to make this video, I did something a little different than what I have previously been doing. I looked at the finishes in 40 different games where Russia, in my own playing history, I wasn't always Russia, but in all of these games, I thought Russia finished somewhat successfully. That doesn't always mean soloing. It doesn't even always mean being included in the draw. It means that Russia was alive, and Russia used its geography to its advantage in order to survive. And with that prelude out of the way, let's get into looking at these games and how you can succeed as Russia. Right off the bat, a very basic observation. In all but one successful Russian finish, I notice Russia kept St. Petersburg. Russia lost Sevastopol, had still lost Sevastopol in 3 out of the 40 games, had lost Warsaw in one of the games, and had lost all of his home centers except St. Petersburg in one of the games. And, that's pretty unusual, but that just goes to show the power of playing as Russia. When you're Russia, you have all of the potential of having essentially two countries at once. You have a northern front and a southern front. If you hold on to your home centers, you always have options. I mean, even if you don't hold on to your home centers, sometimes you can basically rebuild your empire across the world, but you need to hold on to your home centers at the end because they will give you opportunities. If you're being attacked from the north, you can try and hole up in the south. If you're being attacked in the south, you can try and hole up in the north. It's pretty basic, but I do think it's interesting, because, that's not necessarily true of other powers. I think if you look at the history of Germany and Italy and Austria, it's very rare that they can finish by holing up in some small area of the map. Usually, they would just get wiped out completely. And England, I think, is also similar. It's difficult to avoid getting wiped out completely if you aren't growing as England, even though England is more difficult to eliminate. Turkey and England and Russia, I think, are 3 of the more difficult countries to eliminate, with France being a 4th. But you're not looking for that fatalistic stuff. You're not looking for how to survive in the end game. If you are, my answer is, if you're being attacked by Turkey, try to get some of Scandinavia and curl up there. If you're being attacked by the Western powers, you might want to try and make a strong alliance with Austria or Turkey and hole up in the south as strongly as you can. But what you're really here for is not how to survive, it's how to win. So let's discuss how to win. I looked at Russia's most common areas of growth, and I found that the most common area for Russia to grow is Scandinavia. And this sounds kind of basic. I'm assuming, by the way, at the outset that Russia will pretty much always have, if Russia is strong at all, will always have the home centers and Romania. I'm sure if I counted Romania would be as common of a Russian center as having a piece of Scandinavia is. So I should lay those assumptions out. But setting those aside, the most common area for Russia to have acquired at least one center on the map is Scandinavia. Russia will almost always eventually get some of Scandinavia, whether that's just Sweden or both that and Norway. And I think that's worth noting, because sometimes Russia gets bounced out of Sweden early on, and this shows that you should not give up on getting a foothold in Scandinavia. You can make an alliance with England or France, and you can use builds that you gain from your successful conquests in the south. You should devote some attention and some energy to the north, because in almost every game where Russia is successful, Russia gets some of Scandinavia. And speaking of Germany as an obstacle, in 27 out of 40 successful games as Russia, Russia ends up with some of Germany. So Germany is your most common and most likely area of successful expansion. You're going to settle things in the east because you don't really have any choice about that, But once you do that, Germany is the natural, obvious next place to go. And that's also where a stalemate line is, so the sooner you can put some units on the right side of that stalemate line, or just secure it as a way to prevent Germany from advancing to the east, the sooner you can do that, the better. The next most common place for Russia to get centers is Austria, with 26 out of 40 successful Russians getting some of Austria. And the next most common place is Turkey, with 22 out of 40 successful Russians getting some of Turkey. And by Turkey, I mean the Turkish home centers, and by Austria, I mean the Austrian home centers. So this goes to show that, inevitably, no matter which of these two you ally with early on, if you're going to be a really successful, strong Russia, at some point, probably near the end game, you're going to be looking at stabbing one of these two and taking their stuff. And that's important to remember. Less notably, in 17 out of 40 games, Russia had some of the Balkans, by which I mean either Bulgaria or Serbia, since I already said I assume that Russia will have Romania. And Bulgaria or Serbia are traditionally Turkish, so that's more evidence that successful Russians will eventually engage in anti-Turkish aggression. Interestingly, in 19 out of 40 of the successful games as Russia, Russia had Denmark, which just goes to show how committed successful Russians end up being to war in the north. That doesn't mean that you have to commit early on in the north. Ideally, you would foment chaos there and you would take advantage of it later. Additionally, in 13 out of 40 games, Russia ended up with some of England, which just underscores my previous point. Surprisingly, in 9 out of 40 games, Russia ended up with some territory in the Low Countries. So, in the successful Russian games that I surveyed, Russia was more likely to end up having Belgium or Holland than he was to end up with Italian centers. Italy was 8 out of 40 successful games. That tells you a lot, I think, because, that shows that committing to the West is actually an important priority for Russia. You can't afford to ignore it. You can't afford to let the Western powers consolidate their gains. If you do that as Russia, you're very likely going to come up against the kind of resistance you'll have a great deal breaking through, and you won't be able to get into those sweet English centers that tend to accompany a strong Russian performance. And from here I'm going to look specifically at the 10 of the 40 games where we saw a Russian solo victory. In every single game where Russia soloed, Russia conquered part or all of Austria. And in 7 out of the 10 games, Russia got part of Turkey. Additionally, in 9 of 10, Russia got into Serbia or Bulgaria, parts of the Balkans that tend to belong to Turkey when the juggernaut happens. In short, in every single game where Russia soloed, Russia found opportune moments to take supply centers from both Turkey and Austria. Now this is a reminder, again, that diplomacy is a game of betrayal, not loyalty, because no matter whether you initially worked with Austria or Turkey, you're going to have to stab your partner in order to gain the advantage and to achieve a solo. You're going to have to do it. I favor waiting until near the end, because whether you're stabbing Austria or Turkey, the truth is that they are actually very close to your home supply centers, and so a stab of them, fueled by some acquisitions over in the West, is going to be much less predictable, much easier to carry out without them being able to defend themselves effectively than if you were to say, stab them early on and then go after the West. If you stab Austria or Turkey early on and go after the West, then you are a gigantic power that the West will see coming a mile away, and they will consolidate in order to defend themselves against you. They will form some sort of a Western triple, or they will finish off whichever power was weak, and they will find their way toward defeating you by working together. Now, hopefully you've laid the seeds of discontent and mistrust through your diplomacy with them, and hopefully you've kept them so divided that none of them is really strong. And hopefully you'll have a partner in the West, but there's no need to put yourself at a disadvantage by doing anything that will make your task of getting the West to be divided more difficult. There's no need to stab Turkey or Austria, before you go after the West if you don't have a good reason to, if you don't think that they're going to pose a near-term danger to you, when you have the option of continuing to work together with them, especially if your ally is Turkey. I find Austria a little bit scarier to work with than Turkey, honestly, but no matter whether you initially worked with Austria or Turkey, you should always be seeking out a moment of advantage, hopefully near the end, a moment when you can successfully ruin your initial ally, take what they have, and hear the lamentations of their women, or their men, whatever they're into. In 9 out of 10 of these games, Russia had holdings in Scandinavia, so this accentuates the general trend. In 6 out of 10 of these games, Russia had Denmark. In 4 out of 10, Russia had a piece of England. In another 4 out of 10, Russia had some territory in the Low Countries, and together, those two categories, England and the Low Countries, comprised 6 out of 10 of Russian solos. So you can see that Russia does engage in a great commitment to the West in the event of a solo. Russia doesn't just leave matters well enough alone. Russia doesn't contentedly allow Germany or England to just establish themselves in Sweden. If Russia has not successfully won in the north, has not persuaded England to help him or Germany to let him into Sweden, if Russia hasn't done any of those things early on, Russia needs to rectify that once he settles matters in the south. And this also suggests that you need to have insinuated yourself west before you can confidently stab your initial ally for those last crucial 3 or 4 centers. Russia has 2 fronts, and neither can be neglected successfully. If you have a certain degree of security in the south, I suggest a good path toward making sure you can make those advances that are critical in the north and west is by offering yourself essentially as a mercenary. Offering your support to powers in the west, whichever power will have you. I like to pick one of the weaker powers in the west, actually, and balance out whichever power or powers are getting stronger there. Counterbalance those alliances, keep the west in conflict and chaos, and slowly extend yourself in the direction of your ally, and the west will be yours. In only 2 of the games did Russia end the game with French territory. So 2 out of the 10 Russian solos, Russia got into France. That's an incredibly small number. In the larger sample, it was only 5 out of the 40 games. So both of these numbers suggest to me that France in particular is a natural late-game ally for Russia. Don't let him get too strong, but he is a natural ally against both England and Germany, and he might not see the threat that you pose until it's too late, until you've already broken your agreements with him to split Germany and taken all of Germany and broken into Belgium. He might not notice that you're really dangerous until then. Or he might be too greedy to care, and that's the kind of feeling you want to foster. You don't want to let him get too strong. I've seen so many games where France, and whichever country was Russia's initial ally, managed to grow strong enough to counterbalance Russia together and force a 3-power draw. Or even defeat the Russian. Italy is probably the other major option for a late-game ally, but in 5 out of 10 Russian solos, Russia grabbed some Italian centers, and in one of those other games, it was Tunisia, which I needn't tell you is a difficult and tricky center for you to grab, and is also traditionally Italian. So Italy is another ally that you should probably be prepared to stab. England is the third real option for a late-game ally, but he's between you and France, so you probably don't want a late-game alliance with him so much as you want to simply overrun the English centers on your way to France. Consider him as a janissary if he's already very weak, and especially if he's committed to a grudge against France or Germany, because a player that's driven by a grudge or resentment or anger can be a valuable ally. Speaking of Germany, he's virtually never a good late-game ally for Russia. In the only solo of the 10 of these games where Russia didn't take German land, Russia had to break into England, Greece, and even Tunisia, which is generally a pretty unlikely sequence of events for a Russia that has not even successfully defeated Germany. Don't make the game harder than it is by trying to contort Russian expansion into strange shapes. Find an ally to help you and eliminate Germany as soon as you can. I hope these tips will help you. I hope you will find your way, when you play Russia, toward 18 dots, and the glory that is a Russian solo victory. Hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you liked it, I hope you'll like and subscribe. I'm planning now to begin a new series of videos where I'll discuss strategy more generally. I'm also going to make a series of basics of playing each of the other countries, but I'm interested in seeing how I can apply general strategic concepts from other sources like the 48 Laws of Power, The Prince, The Art of War, and other similar really interesting strategic texts, as well as things like how to win friends and influence people to the game of diplomacy. So I'm hoping I'm going to put out a lot of steady content, that I'll be putting out a video or two each week. And I hope you will support me in doing this by sharing my videos and, as I said before, subscribing. I hope you're excited about this, as I am. FloridaMan, out.